The woman, pushing the wide dust mop down the 41st floor corridor at 2 in the morning, had cleaned that same stretch of marble for 912 nights, and the man who owned the building had never once known her name. He knew it now. He was sitting in the dark of his own corner office with her personnel file open on the desk in front of him, and his hand would not stop shaking. There were 4 pages in that folder. He had read all 4 of them twice. Somewhere down the hall, a vacuum hummed and went quiet, and he realized he had been holding his breath again. You are going to want to know what was in those pages. So did he. To understand why a man worth more than most small countries sat alone at 3 in the morning with tears standing in his eyes over a janitor's file, you have to go back to the beginning, to the woman with the mop and the 3 jobs and the small apartment where 2 children were sleeping while she worked. Her name was Renee Mills. She was 41 years old, and she had not slept more than 5 hours in a single night in almost 2 years. People who passed her in the lobby of the Hargrove Tower saw a woman in a grey custodial uniform with a cart of supplies, and most of them saw nothing else. They saw the cart. They did not see her. That was the thing about the work she did. It was the kind of labour that, when it is done well, becomes invisible, because a clean floor looks like a floor that was simply never dirty, and a polished elevator looks like it polished itself. She had made her peace with that a long time ago. She had decided that being unseen was not the same as being worthless, and she carried that decision the way some people carry a faith, quietly and without announcement. The Hargrove Tower job was the second of her 3. It paid the most, $14 an hour, and it ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, 5 nights a week. Before that, from 7 until 2 in the afternoon, she stocked shelves and ran a register at a discount grocery 6 blocks from her apartment. And on Saturdays and Sundays, from early morning until the middle of the afternoon, she cleaned rooms at a chain motel out by the interstate, the kind with a flickering sign and a vending machine that ate quarters. 3 jobs. She had counted it out once on the back of an envelope, the way you count a thing you cannot quite believe. Between the 3 of them, she worked close to 90 hours in a week. She brought home a little under $1,900 a month after what they took out, and rent alone was $1,100. She did the math because she had to, but she tried not to dwell in it. Dwelling did not pay anybody. What paid was the next shift, and the one after that. She had a system for the days worked out over 2 years until it ran without her having to think. She laid her grocery vest and her custodial uniform and her motel apron out on 3 hooks by the door in the order she would need them, so that no matter how tired she was, she could reach for the right one in the dark. She slept in pieces, 3 hours in the late morning after the night shift, a hard nap in the afternoon before the grocery let out, and she had trained herself to fall asleep the moment she sat down, on the bus, in the break room, once standing up in a supply closet with her forehead against a shelf. Her feet had stopped hurting somewhere in the first year, which a nurse at the clinic told her was not a good sign, but a common one. The body going quiet about a pain it has decided complaining will not fix. The children were the reason. The way children are always the reason. There were 2 of them. Marcus was 9, a serious boy with his father's long hands, who read library books under the covers with a flashlight and worried about money in a way no 9-year-old should know how to worry. He had asked her once, very quietly, over a dinner of rice and beans, whether they were poor, and she had told him that a family that ate together at a table was never poor, and he had thought about that, and nodded as if she had handed him something he could keep. And there was Tessa, who was 6, who had been born early and small, and who had a heart that the doctor said would need watching, maybe a procedure some day, maybe more than one. Tessa drew pictures of the 3 of them holding hands and taped them to the wall by the door, and on the worst mornings, the ones where the math felt like a hand around her throat, Renee would look at those crooked crayon figures on her way out and find a reason to keep going. Tessa was the reason the math never quite worked. Her medicine was $90 a month, even with a discount card, and the specialist visits downtown were $200 each, and there had been 4 of them that year already. Renee kept the receipts in a coffee can on top of the refrigerator. She did not know why she kept them, maybe so that someday she could show someone how hard she had tried. Their father was not in the picture. He had left when Tessa was still in the hospital, left a note and a phone that he stopped answering, and Renee had spent exactly one night crying about it before she got up the next morning and went to work, because grief, she had learned, was a luxury that came with a clock. She did not speak badly of him to the children. When Marcus asked, she said that some people are not strong enough to carry what they are given, and that it was not his fault and not Tessa's, and then she changed the subject to something warmer. She had a way of doing that, of turning a hard thing toward the light, without pretending the dark was not there. The night shift crew at the Hargrove Tower was small. There was an older man named Walter who ran the floor buffer and had been cleaning that building since before Renee was born, and a young woman named Camille, who was working her way through nursing school, one course at a time, and a supervisor named Dale, who sat in a back office and rarely came out unless something went wrong. They were good people, mostly. They looked out for one another in the small ways that people on the night shift learn to do, covering a section when someone's bus was late, splitting a thermos of coffee at the 3 a.m. low point when the body wants nothing in the world but sleep. Renee had a habit on that job that the others noticed, though none of them ever made anything of it. On the 41st floor in the executive suite, where the carpet was thick and the air smelled like leather and money, there was a long row of offices with glass walls, and at the end of that row was the largest office of all, the one that belonged to the man whose name was on the building. His name was on a brass plate by the door. Most nights that office was dark and empty, and Renee cleaned it like she cleaned all the others, dusting the shelves, emptying the bin, running the cloth along the edge of the enormous desk that probably cost more than her car. She did one thing in that office, though, that she did nowhere else. On the credenza behind the desk there was a row of framed photographs, and one of them had fallen over once, months ago, not flat. Probably by a cleaning cart or a careless elbow. Renee had stood it back up, and every night since, she checked it. She made sure that photograph was standing straight, because it was a picture of a young woman smiling, squinting into some long-ago sun, and something about the way the woman smiled reminded Renee of nobody in particular and everybody she had ever loved. She did not know who the woman was. She only knew that a fallen photograph is a sad thing, and that it cost her nothing to set it right. She had no idea whose face she was tending. She had no idea that the man who sat at that desk by day had stopped being able to look at that photograph directly, that he kept it there because he could not bear to put it away and could not bear to see it either, and that a small mystery had been gnawing at him for months. The mystery of why that one frame was always, every single morning, standing perfectly straight when he came in, no matter how the cleaning crews rotated, no matter what else got moved. Let me ask you something before we go on, because this is the kind of story that asks it of you. How many people walk past you in a week whose whole lives you never once stopped to imagine? Hold that. The man in this story is about to learn the cost of all the times he did not stop. The man's name was Garrett Hargrove. He was 63 years old, and by every measure the world uses to keep score, he had won. He had built a real estate and logistics company from a single rented warehouse into something that spanned the country, and his net worth, the last time anyone printed a number next to his name, had a B in it. He owned the tower. He owned 3 more like it in other cities. He had a house on a hill that he rattled around in alone, and a car with a driver, and more suits than he could wear in a month. And he was, in the quiet hours, when there was no one to perform for, one of the loneliest men alive. 'Cause 11 years before this story finds him, Garrett had lost his daughter. Her name had been Ellen. She was the young woman in the photograph. She had been 26 years old, full of arguments and warmth and a stubborn streak that was pure Hargrove, and she had spent the last 2 years of her life barely speaking to her father because she had wanted to do work that mattered and he had wanted her to take her place in the company. And they had said things to each other across that gap that neither of them had been able to take back before a virus that turned into pneumonia took her in the space of 9 days one winter. She had been working when she died at a free clinic in a part of the city her father had never visited. She had been living in a 1-bedroom apartment and driving a car with 180,000 miles on it and giving away most of what little she earned, and her father had not understood any of it. He had thought she was punishing him. It was only after she was gone going through her things that he had begun to understand she had simply been trying to be good in a direct and unglamorous way with her own two hands among people the world had forgotten. He had spent 11 years not knowing what to do with that. He gave money away, large sums of it, to foundations and hospitals and scholarship funds, and it never touched the thing inside him that needed touching, because writing a check is easy when you have many checks to write, and Garrett knew, in the place where a man cannot lie to himself, that his daughter had not been talking about checks. She had been talking about seeing people, about the ones nobody sees, and he did not know how to do that. He had never learned. He had spent his whole life being the one who was seen. It was insomnia that brought him to the building that night, the same insomnia that had haunted him for years. He could not sleep in the big house, and on the worst nights he would have his driver bring him to the tower, and he would sit in his dark office with the city spread out 41 floors below, because there was something steadying about being above it all, about the lights. He had done this perhaps a dozen times that year, and on most of those nights the cleaning crew came and went on the floors below him, and he never saw them because they finished the executive floor early in the evening before he arrived. This night was different though, because this night his insomnia had brought him early, just past 10 at the very start of the night shift, and as the elevator doors opened onto the 41st floor, he nearly walked into a cleaning cart, and behind the cart was a woman in a grey uniform who startled and stepped back and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know anyone was here. I can come back to this floor last." Garrett looked at her. Really. For once he looked, because she had surprised him out of the fog he usually moved through. She was a tired woman, lean, with her hair pulled back tight and a name badge that he could not read in the dim light. Her eyes were steady. She was not flustered in the way people usually were around him. She was simply apologizing for being in his path and preparing to remove herself, which was what the world had taught her to do. "No," he said, and his own voice surprised him, rough from disuse. "No, finish your work. Don't let me stop you." She nodded and went back to it, and Garrett went into his office and sat in the dark, and he found that he could not concentrate on the city lights tonight because he kept watching, through the glass wall of his office, the slow, careful progress of the woman with the cart. She did not rush, she did not cut corners, even though she could not have known he was watching. Even though it was the middle of the night and any reasonable person would have hurried. She wiped down the brass railings that ran along the corridor. She got down on her knees to reach a smudge at the base of the wall. And when she came at last into his office, not knowing he was paying any attention at all, he watched her empty his bin and dust his shelves, and then he watched her walk behind his desk to the credenza and reach out and gently stand up the photograph of his daughter, which had tipped over earlier when his own elbow had caught it during a long afternoon of not looking at it. She straightened it. She looked at it for half a second, a stranger's face to her, and she did something he was not prepared for. She smiled at it. A small, private smile, the kind you give a photograph of someone you wish you had known. And then she moved on, gathering her supplies, and she said, "Good night, sir. I hope you get some rest." And she was gone before he could find a single word. Garrett sat very still in the dark for a long time. The mystery of the photograph was solved. It had been her all along. This tired woman with the cart had been standing his daughter up every night for months. This stranger had been performing a small act of care over Ellen's face that he himself could not bring himself to perform, and she had no idea, none, that the photograph meant anything to anyone. She had done it because a fallen picture is a sad thing. She had done it the way Ellen would have done it, without being asked, without being seen, without expecting one thing in return. He needed to know who she was. The next morning, against every habit of a man who delegated everything, Garrett walked down to the human resources floor himself and asked a startled administrator to pull the file on the night custodian who worked the executive floors. The woman, 40-ish, hair pulled back, there was only one who fit. Her name, the administrator said, was Renegade. She had been with the building's contracted cleaning service for 2.5 years. Garrett asked for the file. The administrator hesitated because executives did not ask for janitors' files, because there was no reason in the ordinary running of the world for this to happen. But Garrett was not a man you said no to, and so she printed the 4 pages and handed them across the desk, and Garrett took them back up to his office and closed the door and began to read. That is where this story found him. At the start, a billionaire alone with 4 pages. Now you know how he got there. What you do not yet know is what the pages said. And neither fully did he until he read them slowly, line by line, the way you read something when you have finally decided to pay attention. The first page was the ordinary skeleton of a working life, her name, her age, 41, an address on the east side of the city in a neighborhood Garrett had driven past 1,000 times and never once entered. Date of hire. Pay rate, $14 an hour, which Garrett read twice because he had assumed it was more, because he paid the cleaning contractor a great deal and had never once asked how much of it reached the hands that did the cleaning. Below that was a line for hours, and the number there made him sit forward. Full-time, the maximum the contract allowed, every available shift, plus a note that she had requested to be considered for any additional hours that came open. A woman asking for more work at $14 an hour in the middle of the night. The second page was where it began to take hold of him. It was a record of attendance, and in 2.5 years, Renee had been late exactly twice and absent exactly 3 times. He thought about his own executives, the ones on the floors below, the sick days and the long lunches in the mornings that started at 10, and he thought about a woman who caught a bus at 9:40, so she would never be the reason a floor went uncleaned, and the comparison sat badly in him. One of the absences had a note attached, a copy of a form, because the contractor required documentation for missed shifts. It was a hospital form. A child, admitted overnight. A daughter, age listed, a cardiac issue. The date was 8 months ago, and stapled behind it, because Renee had submitted it to explain why she needed to switch a shift, was a second form from 4 months later. The same child, the same hospital, a follow-up. Garrett read the child's name. He read it again. He thought about what it would be to sit in a hospital chair beside a small bed all night and then ask, not for time off, not for sympathy, but only to trade a shift so that no one else would be inconvenienced. He set the page down and put his hand over his mouth. The third page was a folder of small things that should not have survived in a personnel file at all, the kind of thing that ends up in a folder because nobody ever throws anything away. There was a photocopy of a handwritten note, and Garrett did not understand at first what he was looking at until he read it. It was from a guest at the motel where Renee worked her weekend job. The guest had written in a hurried, grateful hand, the letters running uphill toward the end, the way they do when a person is writing something they feel more than they can say. A housekeeper named Renee had found a wallet left behind in a room, a wallet with nearly $400 in it, folded in among the receipts and the photographs of grandchildren, and had turned it in to the front desk fully intact, every bill still there, and had refused the reward the grateful guest tried to press on her. Had actually stepped back from the offered money with both hands, as if it might burn her, and said only that it wasn't hers to take. The guest had wanted someone to know. The motel had, for reasons lost to bureaucracy, forwarded a copy to the cleaning contractor who had filed it, and there it sat. $400. Garrett thought about what $400 meant to a woman bringing home $1,900 a month with a sick child, what it could buy, the specialist visit and the medicine both, and something left over, and he thought about how she had handed it back without a second thought. And he understood that he was reading the record of a kind of wealth he himself did not possess. The fourth page nearly broke him. It was a letter, 2 paragraphs, addressed to the cleaning contractor and signed by a woman whose name Garrett did not recognize. The woman wrote that her elderly mother had been a long-term resident at that same motel for a stretch of months the previous winter, during a bad patch when the family had nowhere else to put her, and that a housekeeper named Renee had, without anyone asking and without any pay, started checking on the old woman every shift, bringing her a warm meal she paid for out of her own pocket, sitting with her when she was frightened, calling the family when something seemed wrong. The old woman had died that spring. The daughter wrote that Renee had come to the small funeral on her one morning off, in the only good dress she owned, and had sat in the back, and had slipped away before anyone could thank her. The daughter had written the letter because she did not know how else to repay a debt like that, and she wanted it on the record, wherever the record was, that Renee was the finest person her family had ever been shown kindness by in their darkest season. Garrett sat at his desk with the 4 pages spread in front of him and the city going dark beyond the glass. And for the first time in 11 years he felt his daughter close enough to touch, because this was it. This was the thing Ellen had been trying to tell him across all those silent years. Not the checks, not the foundations, with his name on the wall. This. A tired woman on her knees at 2 in the morning, standing up a stranger's photograph, handing back $400 she desperately needed, sitting with a dying old woman nobody else had time for, asking for more hours so her sick child could see the specialist. Goodness, with 2 hands among people. The world forgot his daughter had been describing Renee. She had been describing a woman she never met. And his daughter had been right, and he had been wrong for so long about what a life was actually worth. He did not sleep at all that night. He sat with the file, and somewhere in those dark hours he made a decision. But it was not the decision a man like him usually made, which was to solve a thing with money and be done with it. He had done that all his life, and it had never reached the place that needed reaching. No, he decided, first, that he was going to do the hardest thing, the thing his whole life had not prepared him for. He was going to see her. He was going to learn who she actually was, in her own words, before he did anything else. Because the worst thing he could do, he understood now, the most Hargrove thing, the thing Ellen would have hated, was to swoop down on this woman like a force of nature and rearrange her life to make himself feel better and never once ask her what she wanted. So the next night he came to the building early again, and he waited, and when Renee stepped off the elevator with her cart, he said, "Mrs. Mills, could I trouble you for a few minutes? I'd like to talk with you. Nothing is wrong. You've done nothing wrong. I just want to talk." She was afraid. Of course she was afraid. When a man who owns the building learns your name and asks to speak with you, a lifetime of experience tells you it is going to cost you something. She sat down her cart and folded her hands and waited for the bad news. And Garrett saw the fear and understood it and was ashamed of the whole arrangement of the world that had taught her to expect it. "I want to ask you about a photograph," he said gently. "On the credenza in my office. The young woman. You straighten it every night, for months now." Renee's face changed, and she said, careful, "I hope that was all right. It had fallen over. I didn't mean to touch your thing, sir. I only a picture lying down like that. It seemed like a sad thing to leave. I can stop if it bothered you." "It didn't bother me," Garrett said, and his voice was not steady now. "That was my daughter. Her name was Ellen. She died 11 years ago. She was 26. He watched the woman's face soften into something immediate and unguarded, the quick, true sympathy of a person who knows exactly what loss weighs because she has carried her own. "I have not been able to look at that photograph for a long time, and every morning I came in and found it standing up, and I could not understand who kept setting it right. It was you. It was you the whole time." "I'm so sorry," Renee said simply. "About your daughter. I'm so sorry." And she meant it. There was nothing in it for her to mean it, no advantage, no angle. She just meant it because somebody's child was gone. And that was the saddest thing there was. They talked for almost an hour, there in the dim corridor, the cart between them and the city below. Garrett asked her about herself, and at first she gave the short, careful answers of a woman who has learned that her troubles are not welcome conversation. He kept asking, though, gently, the way you coax a frightened thing, and slowly she told him. She told them about Marcus and his library books, how he hid a flashlight under the pillow and thought she didn't know, how he had read every book on trains the branch library owned and started over on the ones about the ocean. She told him about Tessa and her heart, the coffee can of receipts on top of the refrigerator, the specialist downtown whose office had a fish tank in the waiting room that Tessa loved so much she almost forgot to be afraid. She told him about the 3 jobs and the 90 hours and the math that never quite worked, the grocery in the morning and the tower at night and the motel on the weekends, the bus she caught at 9:40 so she would never be late for the 10 o'clock shift. She did not say it to complain, that was the thing that undid him. She said it plainly, as fact, the way you describe weather, And when she was done, she even smiled a little and said, "We manage. We always have. Tessa's a fighter. And Marcus, that boy's going to do something with his mind someday. I know it." She had been handed a life that would have crushed most people flat, and she spoke of it with gratitude because she had decided somewhere along the way that the children sleeping in that small apartment were a fortune, and that a woman with a fortune like that had no business calling herself poor. Garrett, who had a B next to his name, listened to a woman who brought home $1,900 a month call herself rich, and he understood that he had spent 63 years not knowing what the word meant. He did not tell her that night what he was going to do. He thanked her. He told her, truthfully, that she had given him something he had needed for a long time and had not known how to find. And then he went home and he did not give money away the way he always had, blindly from a distance. He did it the other way, the way that costs you something, the way that requires you to see. It took him 3 weeks, and he did it quietly. He had people he trusted look into everything, not to pry, but to help, and what they found only deepened it. Every word she had said was true, then some. The medical bills were worse than she had let on. There was a payment plan with the hospital that she had never missed, not once, though making the payments meant the lights had been shut off twice, and she had walked 4 miles each way to the grocery job for a month when the car broke down rather than spend the money to fix it. She had told no one, she had simply absorbed it, the way she absorbed everything and kept the children fed and in school and never let them see the worst of it. And then Garrett did the thing. He did it the way Ellen would have wanted it done, though, which was the hardest way, the way that put Renee's dignity first and his own feelings last. He did not show up at her door with a check and a camera. He did not make her stand in a lobby and be grateful in front of people. He asked her instead to come up to his office at the end of her shift one morning, and he had the building's HR director there and the head of the contractor, and he had Renee sit down and he told her the truth plainly, the way she had told him hers. He told her that the cleaning contract for all 4 of his buildings was being restructured and that he wanted her to run the night operations for the executive floors. A real position, salaried, with benefits, with health insurance that would cover Tessa's heart completely. Every procedure, every visit, every dollar, for as long as the child needed it. He told her the salary, and it was more than her 3 jobs combined had ever brought her, by a wide margin, and it was for one job, with regular hours, so that she could be home in the evenings when her children went to sleep. He told her it was a scholarship fund the company ran, that his daughter had quietly started years ago, and that he had let grow without ever understanding why it mattered, and that Marcus, the boy with the library books, had a place in it whenever he was ready, all the way through as far as that mind of his wanted to go. And then he told her the last thing, the thing he had thought about the longest. He told her that the medical debt, the hospital payment plan she had never once missed, the thousands of dollars she had been paying down a little at a time while the lights got shut off, was settled, paid, gone. Not as charity, he said, because he could see her already stiffening at the word, the dignity in her already preparing to refuse. As wages, he said, back wages. For 912 nights of work that the world had paid $14 an hour for, and that had been worth, he had come to understand immeasurably more. For standing his daughter up every night when he could not. For being, without knowing it, the answer to a question his Ellen had asked him 11 years ago, and that he had finally understood. Renee Mills did not say anything for a long moment. Her hands were folded in her lap the way they always were, and then she began to cry. Not loudly, not in the way that asks to be comforted, but quietly, the tears just coming, her shoulders very still. She had carried it all alone for so long, the math and the medicine and the 4 miles each way, and she had never once let herself put it down. And now a stranger had reached over and taken the weight from her hands and called it wages, called it earned, called it hers, and the relief of it was almost more than the body could hold. Why? She finally said, because she had to ask, because nothing in her life had taught her that goodness came back. Why would you do all this? I just straightened a picture. And Garrett Hargrove, billionaire, 63 years old, who had finally learned the thing his daughter died wishing he would learn, said the truest thing he knew. "Because you saw her," he said. "When she fell over, you stood her up. Nobody else did. For months, the only person in this whole building who took care of my daughter's face was the one person in it that everybody walked past. My girl spent her life trying to tell me that the people we don't see are the ones who matter most. And I didn't listen. I didn't listen until you showed me. So this isn't charity, Mrs. Mills. This is just me, finally, all these years too late, doing what my daughter asked." His own voice broke on the last of it. "Let an old man pay a debt he should have paid a long time ago. The story could end there, and it would be enough. You came this far, though, and there is one more thing to see, and it is the part that matters most, so stay with it." A year went by. It was a different life, and yet, in the ways that counted, it was the same woman living it. Renee still got up early. The instinct of 90-hour weeks does not leave a body in a single year. She ran the night operations for the executive floors of all 4 Hargrove buildings now, and she was good at it, careful and fair, and the crews who worked under her would have followed her anywhere because she had not forgotten for 1 second what it was to be unseen, and so she saw every one of them, learned their names, covered their sections when their buses were late, kept a thermos going at the 3 a.m. low point. Walter had retired by then, and Camille had finished her nursing degree, and Renee had been in the 3rd row at the ceremony, clapping until her hands hurt. Tessa had the procedure that spring. Her heart was mended. The doctors said she would run and grow and live like any other child, and she did. Marcus was 11 now, and still read under the covers. Except now there was no worry in it, just wonder, and on his bookshelf there were books that were his to keep, instead of due back in 2 weeks. And in the lobby of the Hargrove Tower, on a wall near the elevators where everyone who came and went would pass it, there was a new photograph, framed and lit. It was the young woman from the credenza, Ellen, squinting into that long-ago sun, and beneath it there was no long inscription, no speech, only her name and her dates, and one line that Garrett had asked Renee to help him choose. It said, she saw the people no one else saw. People walked past it every day. Most of them did not stop. Some of them did, though, and read it, and went on into their day a little changed, which was exactly what Ellen would have wanted, and exactly what her father had finally learned how to give. Bernice still checked that photograph, the new one in the lobby, every night before she went home. She made sure it was straight. It cost her nothing, and it had given her everything, and she had come to understand, in a way she could not have put into words, that the smallest faithful thing a person does when no one is watching is sometimes the very thing that the whole rest of her life turns on. She did not know that, when she first knelt to stand a fallen picture upright, she knew it now. On the morning Tessa came home from the hospital with her mended heart, Renee sat on the edge of the bed in the small apartment they no longer had to leave, and she watched her daughter sleep, even and easy, and she thought about a man alone in a dark office with 4 pages in his hands, and she thought, the world keeps a longer memory than we give it credit for, and not one kind thing is ever truly lost. Then she pulled the blanket up over her daughter's shoulder, the way she had 1,000 times, and she sat in the quiet of a home that was hers, and she rested. If you have ever been the person nobody noticed, the one doing the work in the dark while the world walked past, tell me in a word below what kept you going, because somebody scrolling tonight needs to hear it. And if this story reached you, there is another one waiting. About a waitress who served the same man coffee every morning for 6 years before she learned who he was and what he did when he found out.